Okay. I just wanted to say that our next presentation is from Sweden. So I hope that our colleagues are online and can share their presentation and start. Please tell the words if you can hear us, if you are there.
Yes, we are here. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Yeah.
And we can.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
I just typically when the previous speaker was finished, my internet went offline, so I hope the connection is stable now. This is basically the first time I use WebEx, so I hope I can get some technical help if I don't know how to.
You need to share the screen. Or
yes, so I found that. So share. Okay. So let's see. Can you see?
Nope.
No, because
maybe you can send us your presentation so I can.
Yeah. But let me just try once more because I pressed shared. So should I share entire screen window?
Yeah, you can share your screen if you want to.
Yeah, I have done that and I have pressed share.
Okay, then maybe you need to send us your presentation to events@DIW.
I think we sent it yesterday, actually.
Oh yeah, maybe wait. Yeah, wait a second.
Yes. Now I'm sharing screen, I think.
Yes. Oh, wait a second. Yeah.
Okay. The thing is, I can't see that I am sharing screen.
Yeah, you need to press on PowerPoint.
Yes. Okay. So I hope it is big enough so you can see what's on the PowerPoint.
Yeah, 1 second.
Hello.
Yeah.
Okay. It's very difficult to hear you, but if I just can get a yes that you can all hear me, I can start anyway.
Yes, you can start.
Okay. Thank you very much for being able to be here to present. This is very much work in progress, but we have some preliminary results that we hope we perhaps can get comments on here. So what we are looking at is the Swedish rent control system, which is perhaps a bit different than most other system of rent control. And what we are looking at is how this Swedish system potentially create underutilization, underuse of housing units in rental housing in Sweden. So our objectives are to study this for all 290 municipalities in Sweden. We have received data for all municipalities, and we have data for the time period 2012 to 2020. So we have data for rental housing, but we also have data for co-ops or condominium and single family houses. But for this study, we focus on the subsidized rental housing part of all units. So our measure of underutilization, then what we want to study here, we have simply defined that for each municipality in Sweden, we have data for those rental units where no person is registered on that unit. So underutilization, we say, is the ratio of units with no one registered to the total amount of rental units in Sweden. So the Swedish law says that if you live permanently in a place, you have to be registered on that address and that housing unit. One can of course say that, okay, well, if no one is registered on the unit, then that is simply a vacancy due to low demand. But we also have collected data on vacancy rates for each municipality in Sweden. And there is a huge difference between vacancy rates and the number of units where no one is registered. So we take that as an indication that these units must somehow be underutilized. It's not that the unit is vacant and the property owner does not receive rent for that unit. So just shortly, I think we need to describe how the Swedish rent control system works. One could say that we have what usually is called the second generation rent control regime. This means that in Sweden, basically for each year, rents are determined in negotiation between the national tenant organization and the property owners organization. So this is done on a local level. So the tenant organizations section in Stockholm, for example, negotiate rent for Stockholm with the property owners of Stockholm. So rent is determined by negotiation. But rents for private property owners cannot basically be higher than the rents that are negotiated for municipality-owned housing companies. Well, there are some leeways, so a private property owner can charge a couple of percentage higher rent than what is observed for municipal property companies. And municipal property companies, according to law, they can charge a rent so they get what is called a fair rate of return on invested capital. This is, of course, problematic because no one really knows what is fair rate of return on invested capital, and no one ever actually discussed this more in detail. But basically, in order to know what that is, either you need to get information from industry consultants like property appraisers, or you need to basically estimate some asset pricing model, could be CAPM or a multi-factor model or whatever, to determine the average or required rate of return on a property capital. So this is a big problem. But the Swedish system is characterized by an insider-outsider problems, basically, because a tenant that has been in an apartment for at least 9 months is indefinitely protected and cannot be evicted from that apartment. So that, of course, means in areas where rents are below market clearing rents, there is a very low turnover rate. This system has also led to, especially in the larger cities where prices are high for apartment as condominiums or cooperatives. So a lot of multifamily houses that has been rental houses has been transformed to cooperatives. Simply because that has been profitable both for the tenant and the property owners, since the market for cooperatives, the market is not regulated and you can sell your apartment for market value. Also, municipalities in Sweden determine what is permitted land use, but they cannot say you're only allowed to develop multifamily rental houses here. So the property owner can choose if you want to develop rental or cooperative multifamily houses. Then, of course, in popular areas, developers only develop cooperatives and sell. Another thing that is rather particular for the Swedish system is that virtually all households in Sweden are qualified for rent control flat, and that is independent on what income level is or what your social need is. So all are qualified for rent control flats. Perhaps a very peculiar effect of this is that those who are not qualified are in most cases tenants that doesn't meet the minimum income requirement. So most property owners, and that include municipal property owners, they have a minimum income requirement in order for you to be able to rent a flat. So that means that also those who have the biggest need for rent control flats are those who are outsider in this system. So we have used official data to get information about how many households there are in each municipalities and how many apartments that have households registered on each flat and how many people that are in each household. We have also taken data from the property assessment register and the apartment register in Sweden, who keeps records of all rental and cooperative flats and who lives there. So just to see what we are studying here and what is very peculiar to us and that we need to dive much deeper into. As I said, this is just the beginning of this paper. If we look at the leftmost columns, we have vacancy in rental units reported. This is official numbers collected from all property owners in Sweden and reported to Statistics Sweden. Unfortunately, vacancy data is only available in 5 categories, and that is Greater Stockholm, Greater Gothenburg and Greater Malmö, which are the 3 biggest cities in Sweden, and also for the remaining cities with a population of more than 75,000 inhabitants and the group of less than 75,000 inhabitants. So as we can see, vacancy in the meaning that property owner does not get rent for housing units is very low, basically everywhere in Sweden. So it's just a fraction of what we have defined as possible underutilization, the underutilization rates. As we can see, the average for Sweden of underutilization is about 10%. So that means basically that according to official data, 10% of rental units in Sweden does not have any person or household registered on that unit. And as we can see, it's the lowest in Stockholm, Gothenburg, and Malmö, and the highest in the smallest municipalities. The rates are about the same or a bit lower for cooperatives, but much lower in the rightmost column for single-family houses. We believe that this is an effect of the fact that if we look at the size of rental units and cooperative flats where no one is registered, that is much smaller than for single-family houses. For, I think it was 2020, we have data. No, it was 2019. For rental units and cooperatives, the average size of apartments with no one registered on was 59 square meters. But for single-family houses, that was 100 square meters. So we think that can explain why there are much less underutilization of single-family houses. It's simply more expensive to hold a single-family house that you don't use compared to a small apartment. We can see here, I hope you can see on the screen that these maps are big enough. So the leftmost map of Sweden shows our measure of underutilization rate for 2012 and the right for the year 2020. And we have divided this into 5 categories: less than 10%, and then 10, 15, 15, 20, 20, 25, and the dark blue above 25% of the apartment. So we can see here that the areas with the largest underutilization rate and the smallest underutilization rates are rather concentrated. The northern and northwest of Sweden and west of Sweden and some parts of southern Sweden are those where underutilization is very high. But then we have mainly in, as can be seen, perhaps mostly in the rightmost map here, in the area of Greater Stockholm, Greater Gothenburg, and Greater Malmö. I don't know if you can see when I move my cursor here. Can you do that? Okay, so this is Greater Stockholm, Greater Gothenburg, and down here we have Greater Malmö. So underutilization has diminished somewhat between 2012 and 2020, but the rates are still very, very high. And of course, the first guess that you have when you see these high rates of underutilization would be that, well, that's vacancy due to low demand in these areas. But as we have compared with the vacancy rates, we know that that is not the case. Another interesting thing to compare with is the rent in those areas. So we have collected median rents for all municipalities for the year 2020. Those rents were also collected from Statistics Sweden. And we can see here, if we take the leftmost map showing underutilization 2020, and median monthly rent per municipality in Swedish crowns per month. So, 10 Swedish crowns or 11 is about €1. So that is the size of the rent level per square meter in Sweden here. So we can see here that there is pure visually a relationship between median rent level and underutilization. So we can see clearly that in the areas where rents are the highest, in the densely populated areas like Stockholm, Gothenburg, and Malmö, the underutilization rates are the lowest, and vice versa, where rents are low, underutilization rate is high. Just to confirm this statistically, we run a very simple standard OLS regression with underutilization as dependent variable and median rent for each municipality as independent variable. And the result is very significant, saying that for each 10 crowns per square meters and month, underutilization is reduced with 3%. So this is a clear relationship between underutilization and the rent that you have to pay. So we need, this is in the continuing of this paper, we really need to dig deeper into this number. We were actually surprised when we saw how high rate of all rental units in Sweden that no one is registered on. So the first thing we actually have done is that we discussed with Statistics Sweden to check that there are nothing wrong with the numbers that we have, and they confirm that the figures that I have shown here are the correct numbers. So there are of course possible reasons why we observe this, and I just have a list of a few reasons that we think are the most possible reason. For example, that people, of course, may live in one place and work in another place. So they have an overnight flat where they stay overnight some days of the week or so. So you have a need of 2 apartments. It is also the case that in some areas in Sweden, in the ski resorts and in some coastal areas, people use a second apartment, an apartment as a recreational second home. We also think that there are cases where students live in an apartment, but they are still registered in their home where their family live in another city. It is also the case, we think, that if you have been in the rental queue for a very long time, for example in Stockholm, it's not uncommon that you are in the queue for 20 years and then finally you get an apartment in an area that is close to you and where perhaps you would like your children to have an apartment in the future. You simply take that apartment and you rent it for the future, so your child can move in there when he or she gets older. And there are, of course, we don't know, no one knows the exact degree, but there are, of course, subletting without permission from the property owners, and the one who sublet the apartment do not wish that the subletter registered on that apartment, because you're not allowed to do that. Could also be the case that the flat is occupied by a tenant, but the tenant is registered in another municipality, for example, because tax rate is much lower in that municipality, and there can be quite a big difference between tax rates, the local tax rates in Sweden. So it could be a worthwhile alternative, or it is easier to get other types of subsidies in the municipality where you are actually registered. So, as I have said, this is very much work in progress, and well, we have not arrived at very specific conclusions yet. We need to dig a lot deeper in this, and we plan to do that by interviewing different types of property owners, both municipal property owners and private property owners in big cities and small cities where we have a high rate of underutilization and cities where we have a low rate of underutilization, to hear what they have to say about this and how much they are aware of this, that such a large fraction of units where no one is registered on. But our belief is that at least to some degree, this type of underutilization may occur because the economic value for the one who chooses to hold a flat where you don't live permanently is higher than what the cost is, since rent is subsidized. And we think that it's important for us to dive a lot deeper into this, because it's a potential conflict between this result, what we see here, and opinions in the debate, where many municipalities and people in the debate say we have a housing shortage in most of Sweden, and we need to develop more multifamily houses. For example, the National Board of Housing, Building and Planning, and I don't know if it's every year or every second year, they make a survey when they ask the municipalities, do you believe that the market is in balance, there is a housing shortage, or there is an oversupply of housing? So 2/3 of all, in the latest survey, 2/3 of all municipalities in Sweden answer that it's a shortage of housing supply. Okay, so, well, policy implications. Of course, if we, when we dive deeper in this, see that people use apartment very sparsely or not at all, due to the fact that it's rather cheap with the subsidized rent-controlled apartment. That is, of course, not an efficient use of apartment and leads to overconsumption. So the most natural policy implication here would be that rent-controlled apartments should only be for those who have economic or social need for the apartment. Also, a more rigorous control is needed to check that households actually live where they are registered. Okay, thank you very much. I hope the technique worked here. Any questions?
My first question would be, you introduce the Swedish rent control system, but you then do not connect the underutilization with the rent control. I mean, you have told us that after 9 months, the tenant gets indefinite tenure, and of course there's an option value also. It's not just the subsidized rent level, but there's also an option value of being able to dispose of your property in whatever form, whether to sell, whether to mortgage, what have you. So to what extent would you think, in terms of taking these 10% on average from apartments, what proportion of that 10% would be of underutilization would be due to the extreme tenure, long-term tenure as part of the rent control regime? Not just the rent level.
Perhaps you can. It was so difficult for me to hear on my computer speaker here. Perhaps you can answer, Bo, if you are with us.
Yes, I'm here, but I had difficulties hearing as well. Could you please say the question again?
Yeah, because can you just stop sharing your screen?
Oh yeah. Thank you.
Talking to this?
Yes.
Here's the microphone.
Yeah.
Yeah. Hello. Thank you. I looked a little bit into the Swedish market in a recent study for the Council of European Development Bank, and the rent control regime, and compared to other European countries, is extremely rigid in Sweden in comparison. So I wonder, because you mentioned the regulated rent level as one of the reasons why there may be underutilization, but to what extent does the tenure of the tenancy, that's basically indefinite after 9 months, play a role in landlords simply saying, okay, that's too risky for me because I cannot dispose of the asset after 9 months. Basically, it's out of my control. I cannot easily sell it. I cannot mortgage it, and so on and so on. And what proportion of that 10% would be due in general to the rent control regime in your view?
So if I understand correctly, you mean that so to say the tenancy protection component, so to say, of the rent control might have an effect. But well, first of all, the tenant protection works this way, that once you get hold of a rental flat and you have kept it for more than 9 months, you cannot be evicted for any other reason than misbehavior or not paying your rent. But on the other hand, that would not, to my understanding, be a threat to the property owner, because the property owner, well, of course, they might have something to win on getting rid of certain tenants, but getting rid of one tenant does not improve to any extent the possibility to raise rent for the next tenant. So the rent level will remain at the same rate whenever there's a change of tenant. So to our understanding, so to say, the basic problem is the ceiling, not the protection component. But of course, many people would argue that it's the ceiling that actually is the protection, because if you would be able to raise rent when a new tenant comes in, then the protection for the sitting tenant would be lower. Did that to some extent answer your question?
I'm not sure what I should believe it, but I think it answers, of course. I mean, do you have term contracts in Sweden, like 2 years, 5 years?
No.
Maybe experimenting with that on a regional level at least might.
No. Yeah, that of course that might, and that's what argued, of course, when people argue that a more market-oriented rent level or rent setting regime would be introduced, then there would be room for leases with different lengths. But as it is now, all leases are formally, I think they are signed for 1 year. But it doesn't mean anything in terms of the property owner's right to get, or so to say, get rid of the tenant.
I think yes,
It's just automatically renewed every year.
All over, yeah.
Yeah.
I think one can say that after 9 months, lease is indefinite until tenant wants to move.
In practice, that's what happens.
That's how it works. And I think perhaps one answer to your question as well is, I don't know. This is why we need to ask property owners, but a conspiratoric view or whatever you called it on why Swedish property owners don't react on this. Perhaps it's economically an advantage to have empty flats because no hot water or electricity or whatever, you don't have costs and you don't have to renovate if people don't live there. So I think property owners may know that there are so many tenants where illegally no one is registered, but pay the rent there, because it's you don't have problems with tenants that are not there and the costs are low. I don't know, but that actually could be some economic advantage with that type of tenants.
Okay, thank you.
I think there was a question from Steve.
Yeah, you can read it to you.
Okay.
I put it in the chat because the sound wasn't working so well. But basically, it was comment that there's a recent paper by Sahil Gandhi and Richard Green that looks at this issue. It's very under-researched. I mean, I think vacancies and rent control. There are so many things going on, as you indicate in your paper. If you haven't seen it, that paper and some of the literature it cites might be of interest. I can follow up with you via email later, or anyone else who's interested.
Yeah, thank you.
Cool. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for your presentation. I have one question because researcher from my research center made a research looks like yours. They try to compare the number of people registered to the number of housing, but there is a problem with both numbers. They are not confident with the numbers because registered person, well, a lot of people do not register, and the number of housing is also a number in which we are not very confident because it's very old numbers. Maybe the thing change in the buildings, housing are merged, are divided. So to compare those numbers, it's very dangerous if you do not go on the field and look to what's happening on the ground exactly. And so I question, how are you confident with these numbers?
Okay, should I take it? Yeah.
Yes, you can do that.
Yes, of course, we very much agree with you, and we have, of course, have been very hesitated about using these numbers too much and too officially too publicly until we're really confident that we can trust the figures. I think that we can be quite certain about the total number of housing units because the land registry where the single family housing and the assessment record where the assessed values of single family housing and all that, they I think they are counted for decades, if not hundreds of years, very, very properly, and so we can rely on that. And 2012, the apartment record or register was introduced, and of course, at the first year, you could perhaps not rely on the counting of the number of rental and cooperative flats, but over now 8-9 years, I think that record has been gradually improved, and I think we can very much rely on those figures. But then, of course, people might register their residency. Well, you can never trust that, and we know that, of course, there are mistakes in the way people register on housing units, but we do not know the degree to what they make mistakes in that, and that is of course something we will have in the follow-up to these data, that follow-up studies to these data, what we will have to check more thoroughly.
If I just may, one short comment on this. I mean, there, of course, we will find that there are some errors in the data. But one thing that I think really is encouraging with respect to that there is something in this, that it is actual underutilization due to regulated rents, is that we can see such a clear relationship between median rent level and the level of underutilization. When the rent level goes up, underutilization goes down. So we think that there is definitely something in our data, even though we don't know exactly yet what it is and how large the errors are, but something is in the data, we think. Okay, thank you.
I have one question about data. So as far as I understand, this underutilization rate shows the proportion of dwellings where nobody is registered. And you don't know whether somebody really lives there or the dwelling stays empty. Okay, so as far as I understand, that's the definition of the indicator you are working with. One thing, for example, in Berlin, there's a research institution. They used to compute the vacancy rate using the data of electricity and water, whatever consumption. So using this data, you can determine what part of this underutilization is due to, let's say, black or gray market letting of these dwellings, and what is really these dwellings staying empty. So this might be interesting to see.
Yeah.
And I didn't really, so you try to explain that for some landlords it makes sense to leave apartments empty because the costs are low, but in that case they don't get any rent. So whether it's really reasonable to leave apartments completely empty, okay, they don't incur costs, but at the same time they don't receive any rent. What's the economic benefit of this?
No, the point is that they do get rent. And we say that because we see such low vacancy rates. That is just a small fraction of the apartments that we call underutilized. So they get rent for the whole difference between, what is vacancy rates? Basically below 1% on average, or around 1% on average in Sweden. But underutilization is 10%. So 9% they actually get rent from people who pay rent, but still no one is registered on that apartment. And we think also the vacancy numbers are, I think, quite what is real economic vacancy, because that is data collected by Statistics Sweden, and all Swedish municipality-owned property owners are required to send in the data. And also they take a large sample of private property owners to whom they send out questionnaires about vacancy. So we are pretty confident on vacancy rates are that low. Vacancy rates in the meaning that no one pays rent for that flat. So remaining part, even if no one is registered there, the property owner gets the rent. So that was what I meant. You get the rent, but you have lower cost because the apartment is in many cases not used that much. Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Okay, one more question.
Yeah, thank you for your presentation. I would want to ask one question about the public discourse in Sweden. I assume it is well known that there's this underutilization, but how do people react? Is there a public outcry? And if so, why doesn't, as you mentioned in your policy implications, why is there no law that requires tenants to be registered for renting? Yeah.
Should I take it, okay?
Yes, please do that.
Yeah. Well, there is a law. You should register where you actually live, but there's no connection to you should register in order to be able to receive the benefits of having a rental flat with controlled rent that is economically favorable. So there's a you should be registered correctly, and the first question is something we also worry a lot about. Why? And as we say, as these figures are known, the point is they aren't known until now, because not until now has anyone, so to say, merged these official records in this particular way that it shows that there are flats where no one is registered. So this, I think, no one knows about this yet, but so therefore we are. It's important for us to very quickly continue with the follow-up interviews to make sure that we can explain fully what's behind these figures, because most likely there will be a debate about this.
And one can also say that tax authorities that should control this is absolutely not the prioritized area to control. They control if people pay tax and so on, but I don't think they have any system to thoroughly follow up everyone in Sweden and all apartments.
No, I'm just saying that we're perfect on time. Thanks a lot for all presenters and all listeners. And now I think we deserved 1 hour lunch. So please Bon appetit, and we'll see each other in 1 hour time. Bye.
Thank you very much for your interest in our paper and all the questions. Thank you.